in some way. Lots of people here. Okay, so everyone heard that the recording is in progress. I want to say welcome to everybody. It's February and we're still all here together on Zoom, I'm happy to say. Does everyone have the accessibility they need in terms of captions? Can everyone, if anyone is not able to see the captions right now, and you have a question, now's the time to give me a shout out. And if you're muted, I won't be able to hear you. If you're muted, it means that on the lower right-hand corner next to your picture, there's a microphone crossed out. So everybody's hearing okay? All right, good. You can see the captions at the bottom of the screen. Mine are appearing as 4 lines at a time. You can also click on view full transcript, which appears in a slightly different way. But if you miss something, it means you can go back and catch up if you're a fast reader. If you're not seeing the captions once we get started, there's really not anything I can do about it. So that's one reason I want to check now. David's going to give his presentation. I think it's about 35 or 40 minutes. And then I think we should wait to have questions afterwards. When we get to the point of having questions, the best way to ask your question is to go down to the bottom of your screen and across towards the right to reactions. And if you click on that little smiley face, you'll see a hand raise icon right at the bottom. It'll line up at the top of the screen and I'll be able to call you in the order that you've raised your hands. And then once you finish talking, if you can look at that again and lower your hand, that just helps to prevent confusion. The recording, as always with our programs, will be available on our website. It takes about 2 or 3 weeks to put it together and to embed the captions, but they're there all the way back now into 2020, which is quite a long time. The website, as everyone knows, I think, is hearinglossnyc.org. So when you do speak, if you can remember to speak slowly, it helps the rest of us to follow along. And you should unmute yourself when you're ready to speak by going down to the bottom left where your little microphone is.
Lots of people are unmuted.
People, okay,
Yeah,
yes.
I will do a mass mute before we get going.
Okay. Why don't you do that right now, David? Just so
I
sure.
am muting everyone but you and me, and people can unmute as necessary.
Okay.
Okay, should be good.
Okay, and then right next to the mute at the bottom of your screen is the video screen, and you can also have yourself just appear by your name, but it's really nice for the rest of us if you allow yourself to be seen, because I think it makes us feel a little bit more as if we're a community meeting in person. So if you're comfortable, please have the video camera turned on your computer. So that's all I have to say as introduction. I am really happy to introduce somebody that you know very well from our meetings, David Landsberger. Thank you so much, David. David is an auditory scientist at the Department of Otolaryngology at NYU Grossman School of Medicine. His training in cochlear implants occurred at the House Ear Institute in Los Angeles, where the first cochlear implant was developed, and I'm sure that's part of his presentation. And at the University of Melbourne in Australia, where the first multi-electrode cochlear implant was developed. David's work has to do with cochlear implants, and he would have to explain it to you because it's way over my head. But his research interests include improving how music sounds through cochlear implants and developing new ways for signal processing and electrode designs. He is also a founder of York Sound Incorporated, which is developing and commercializing a noise reduction algorithm for cochlear implants, which those of you who have cochlear implants will probably be interested in, as well as hearing aids, and designed to better quash background noise than is now available. He is a member of our chapter board and has been since 2020. And David, it's over to you. Thank you so much. This is a talk that David has developed about the history of cochlear implants, of which he probably knows more than anybody at this point. So thanks, David.
Great. Thank you very much. Okay, let me share my screen. Okay, we should be going. Please let me know if there are any problems. I see let me turn off captioning. I see that they're blocking the screen. Please, I'm sorry about this. Forgive me. I'm going to stop sharing so I can get rid of that captioning box. Hide captions. Okay, let's try that one more time. Close.
That box is gone. I think it's okay.
Okay, we are okay. Good. Okay. Sorry, I hadn't realized I've got all this other stuff there.
David, let me just say one more thing. This is with the slide, this is even more confusing. But if anyone doesn't realize, you can actually move your own caption box as you're seeing it on your screen to the side just by clicking on it and pulling, because different slides that may be in the way of something that you want to see. So you have control of where your slides appear.
Great. Okay, let me begin. Thank you very much for the opportunity to talk to you about a topic that I find fascinating, and hopefully you'll find it interesting as well. And that's the history and development of cochlear implants. Now, getting a cochlear implant, it's a big decision. I can understand why it might take a lot of consideration to decide if you want to get one. But imagine the early days. Once upon a time, there weren't people with cochlear implants. When the first few people were given the options to get a cochlear implant, there was no company to support it. There was no track record of success. We didn't know if it would work. We didn't know what the surgeries would be like. This was a really big deal. The original story of cochlear implants probably starts with Volta. Now, people know Volta for his work with batteries. Now, one thing he did, and I have no idea why he did it, but he decided one day to connect a 50-volt battery across his ears, place one lead in one ear and another lead in the other ear. And when he did that, he heard sounds, he heard noises. This was fantastic because it demonstrated for the first time that electric stimulation would be able to provide a hearing sensation. I have here on the screen a quote that I love of his experience. At the moment when the circuit was completed, I received a shock in the head, and some moments after I began to hear a sound, or rather a noise in the ears, which I cannot well define. It was kind of a crackling with shocks, as if some paste or tenacious matter had been boiling. The disagreeable sensation, which I believe might be dangerous because of the shock in the brain, prevented me from repeating this experiment. Again, nuts, but it taught us a lot. Very important establishing piece of information. Fast forwarding more than 150 years later to a French group whose names I have great troubles pronouncing, DeJourno and Ayres. Anyway, the otologist in the group was performing a surgery on an awake deaf patient. And in the process, he accidentally provided electric stimulation to the auditory nerve. And the patient responded, I can hear something. I can hear something, which was incredible because this patient was deaf. How could he hear something? But this was the inspiring moment for the team. Electric stimulation of the auditory nerve allows somebody to hear. And so they built an implant. They built a device that would stimulate the auditory nerve. And they implanted it in a patient. And it worked. And by worked, I meant the patient could hear that there were sounds. There was an auditory sensation from this. The device failed after about a month, so they tried again, and they gave him a new device, and it also failed in about a month. And that was more or less the end of their story. But this was the very first time anybody had developed an implant to provide hearing or a hearing-like sensation by electric stimulation. It's not quite a cochlear implant, because to be a cochlear implant, by definition, you need to implant something within the cochlea. This stimulated the auditory nerve directly and was not inside the cochlea. The very first cochlear implant occurred in 1961 in Los Angeles by House and Doyle. This is a very simple design. It was basically, you had a single electrode that was inserted into the cochlea, and all sound was represented on this one electrode. It was implanted by a team of surgeons, Bill House and John Doyle, and the device was built by John Doyle's brother, Jim Doyle. And with this device, they implanted 2 patients in January of 1961. Unfortunately, there was a falling out between House and the Doyles. I've heard a couple of stories. I don't know the full story, but it sounds like there was some drama. In the end, the Doyles and House split up and refused to communicate over this. The Doyles built the device and refused to share how it was built and the details of the engineering. The end result was that if House wanted to keep implanting, he needed to start from scratch. He needed to build another implant from the beginning again. Although 2 patients were implanted with this device, because of the unfortunate situation around this original implant, nobody ever published reports about the device or any clinical outcomes with this device. And this almost lost to history. In 1969, House tried again. He was working with a new engineer, Jack Irvin. And together, between 1969 and 1970, they implanted 3 patients with a new device that was similar to the original. It was a single electrode implanted into the cochlea. And they followed them for a number of years. And in 1973, they published their first paper on these patients. And they demonstrated that these patients could hear with their device, that it seemed to be safe. The surgeries went well, and 3 to 4 years later, they were still using them. They were still working just fine, and they were getting benefit from these devices. It took a while, but by 1984, the FDA approved this device, and it was commercialized by 3M. Yes, that's right. The company that makes Scotch tape actually was the first company to have a commercial cochlear implant system on the market. It had only one electrode. It helped for lip reading, and it proved that a hearing device could be safely implanted. But without lip reading, speech understanding was really still quite poor. It was a wonderfully beneficial device in certain situations, and patients were very happy for it, but there's a long way to go still. Many teams were followed up and around the world working on a cochlear implant. And in 1978, Graham Clark provided the first successful multi-channel cochlear implant. This device in Melbourne, Australia, was developed by Graham Clark and team, and in 1982 became commercialized by Nucleus, which eventually became Cochlear. They released the Cochlear Nucleus 22, which in 1985 was FDA approved and was on the market and available for the first time. Now, performance with this device was much better than those early house single channel devices. People were now starting to understand speech without lip reading, but there's still a lot of room to improve. A 25% word score in sentences in quiet. Well, that's huge compared to somebody who has absolutely no hearing, but it's not the cochlear implant that we know and love today. So I've been telling you now about some of the early surgeons and engineers. But each of the early surgeons and engineers had to have early patients to work with. I will tell you the story of one of those patients, Rod Saunders. And I picked Rod Saunders because, well, for a number of reasons. One, I knew him personally. I was honored to be able to call him a friend. This photograph, I happen to love this photograph. It's the only photograph I have with me and Rod Saunders. And it just so happens it was at a Christmas party and I was wearing a Santa suit and I was sitting on his lap. But this is me sitting on the lap of the very first person to get a prototype cochlear, prototype nucleus device. So Rod lost his hearing in a car accident all of a sudden. And when he came in to see Graham Clark, he was asked to come and participate in this experiment and be the first patient with this prototype cochlear implant. There's, of course, no speech processor, no track record, nobody to ask about the experience. No. Instead, the deal was he was to come into the laboratory after the surgery all day, 8 hours a day, 5 days a week for 2 years, so that the team in Melbourne could try to figure out how to provide hearing to this man with this cochlear implant. Now, the story, as it was explained to me, he comes, there's no speech processor. He has to sit by a rack of equipment where he's hooked up and they try to make sounds. In fact, there was a problem with the cabling. I don't know the details, such that it took many days before they're able to produce a sound at all. And the question whether it would work at all for a while as a result. Although, as legend has it, the very first sound he did hear successfully was the song God Save the Queen, and he was very proud of that. But after a while working in the laboratory, they were able to build for him a, quote, portable speech processor. Now, you will notice this speech processor. You can see here, it is a large device. It had to be carried in a bag that you held, that was strapped over your shoulder. There's a microphone, a large external microphone. And that would feed into the speech processor over here. And then, like a modern speech processor, the signal would come out of it to a coil, which was here, and transmit the information through the scalp, like a modern implant, to the internal device. However, what was different about this than a modern device was there's no magnet in the coil. That meant it didn't stick on the patient's head. Instead, it needed to be mounted on a headband so that the person could have the coil in place. Here's some early photos that you can see. Here's Rod Saunders wearing his portable speech processor, listening to an audiologist through a microphone, and listening via a coil that you can see is attached to his head with a headband. And then on the right, you have George Watson. Now, George was the second person to receive a Melbourne prototype cochlear implant. He's also using this very nice and small and elegant portable processor. And he's listening with the coil that is mounted on a different kind of headband. Okay. So now I'm going to play you a video of Rod that was filmed in 1978, one of the first filmed speech tests with the cochlear implant. It starts with him listening without the implant, and then he's told to put it up.
In the end. In the end.
In the
End.
head.
End. In the end. Put the coil back on. Put the coil back on.
Difficult.
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? Is it loud enough? Good. In the end.
In the end.
There was so much material
There was so much material
wrapped around his head,
wrapped around his head.
he could hardly keep his balance.
He could hardly keep his balance.
He was then given a revolver.
Okay, impressive. I love this video. But you can see the microphone here. Here's the microphone and the headband holding the coil over here. Here is another video where Rod is not able to see the audiologist's lips.
Raw.
Raw. No, I don't see it.
What is the pitch?
What is the pitch?
Good. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Good.
Okay. So eventually, by 1982, Nucleus, which eventually became Cochlear, developed their first commercial processor. This is much more elegant, much smaller. In other words, you could fit it into a very large pocket and you didn't need a strap to wear it around your shoulder. It still had a coil in the earliest of days that had to be held in place by a headband. Now, I've been telling you a little bit about the Australian story, how Graham Clark at the University of Melbourne developed this technology that eventually became Cochlear. But many groups around the world were also working on a cochlear implant. These are the ones that developed into commercial products. So at UCSF, Mike Merznick and his team developed what was called the UCSF Stores implant, which eventually became the Advanced Bionics device. And in Austria, first in Vienna, the Hochmeyers, Ingeborg and Erwin Hochmeyer, developed an early cochlear implant system that originally looked a lot like the house system and was marketed by 3M, but eventually went on their own and built what became Medel. In France, a group led by Chouard developed an early cochlear implant. That technology eventually was brought into a company called Neuralec, which produced the French cochlear implant system. And that was then bought out by Oticon to be put into Oticon Medical to make cochlear implants for Oticon Medical. Now, I'd like to describe to you a cochlear implant called the Inner-Aid. Now, the Inner-Aid was built by a company in Salt Lake, but was never commercialized. It was a research-only device, and about, I don't know, a couple hundred people received this device. It's a really interesting device because much was built on this platform. In this device, there are a bunch of electrodes. You can see the electrodes here, and they are implanted into the cochlea, much like a modern cochlear implant, although each of the electrodes is on their own lead instead of being on an array where they're all put in together. But the important detail for us is that these wires are wired into this pedestal and out to this jack here. What this little buttony looking thing, you can see over here, the outer part of this black circle stays in the skin, and then this inner part comes out of the skin through to the outside of the head. And you can see that here. So this is actually the cochlear implant sticking out of the guy's head. And here you can see these little holes in this connector here. This is a jack that connects directly to the wires. This is the end of the wires. The leads are right here. It's like having a headphone jack directly in your head. we could connect any equipment we wanted to these wires. There were no electronics inside of this device. All of the electronics had to be placed outside. Now, as a patient, I wouldn't want this. I wouldn't want this thing sticking out of my head. In addition to looking ugly, you have to worry about it getting damaged. You have to worry about infection and keeping this wound clean. It's a production. But because all the electronics are on the outside and you can connect anything you want, researchers were able to use this device to try all sorts of new patterns of stimulation to try to figure out the best way to provide information to a cochlear implant. In other systems that have electronics built in, like everything I've shown you before, you are then limited to what's inside the head. Here, all the electronics are outside of the head, and so there really were very few limitations to what you could do. Using the inner ear device, Blake Wilson was able to develop an algorithm called CIS, or the Continuous Interleaved Stimulation Strategy. Basically, what this strategy does is it takes the entire auditory world, splits it up into different frequency regions, one for each electrode, and provides everything, all the frequencies to the cochlear implant user, allowing the brain to figure out what the important details are instead of having the engineer try to figure out what the important details are. One of the magical tricks with CIS was, instead of providing information from every electrode all the time, each electrode takes a turn. You got stimulation on a first electrode, then the second, then the third, one electrode at a time, but at a very fast rate, so that the auditory system thinks it's getting continuous information all the time. This is very much like an old television, old tube television, where they would only show you one line of the picture at a time, but it would move fast enough so that we would think we were getting the entire picture. Now, this new strategy was wonderful. With it, you can see patients' ability to understand speech and quiet jumped dramatically. This is a huge improvement. Indeed, while CIS as a name really isn't used anymore, nobody's using the CIS algorithm per se, the basic CIS is the foundation for all of the signal processing done by all the manufacturers in today's cochlear implants. This was really the foundation of signal processing for the cochlear implant. And this was figured out because of the inner ear device, where you could connect anything you wanted to the device and play. For all of this work, a Lasker Award was given for cochlear implants. For those of you who don't know, the Lasker Award is basically the American Nobel Prize. 3 people received the Lasker together for the cochlear implant field, and they were Blake Wilson on the left, who invented that CIS strategy, Ingeborg Hockmeyer, who built one of the earliest cochlear implants and became the CEO of Med-El. She founded Med-El, and Graham Clark, who developed the Australian Melbourne cochlear implant system that eventually became Cochlear. So outcomes with cochlear implants now, they were becoming good.
I had to turn off my watch.
Hang on, I'm gonna mute. Okay. So outcomes with cochlear implants were now they're becoming really good. So much so that there are patients with cochlear implants who are understanding speech better than some people with hearing aids. So what do you do? In the early days, it was easy to decide to give someone a cochlear implant because in order to qualify, you could have no hearing, in which case there was nothing to lose. But what do you do with somebody who has some hearing? For example, if you take a look at this audiogram on the left, for those of you who don't know how to read an audiogram, what this audiogram is showing, this example, is somebody who has very good hearing for low frequencies, can hear low pitch rumbling, low pitch sounds extremely well. Mid frequencies are difficult and high frequencies are gone. So this person is unlikely to be able to understand speech very well. Nevertheless, has a fair amount of hearing left in this ear, a lot of hearing at the low frequencies. What do? Well, one idea is you let them listen acoustically to the low frequencies, either with their ear directly or with the hearing aid if necessary. And then you insert an electrode array from a cochlear implant just to cover the frequencies that are problematic, the mid to high frequencies. Then you can provide the mid to high frequencies electrically and the low frequencies acoustically. We refer to this in the field as electric acoustic stimulation, or EAS. The first trials for this to combine these two were done nearly simultaneously in 1999 by the group at Iowa, sponsored by Cochlear, and a group in Germany, sponsored by Middle. Now, this is still to the current day, this is still an exciting topic that is hotly debated and greatly researched. When it works, when it works, it can work very well. The problem is when we implant a cochlear implant, sometimes we're able to preserve this hearing very well, and sometimes we are not. And to this day, we do not know why some people lose their hearing and some people do not lose their hearing, nor do we know how to predict who would keep their hearing nor lose who would lose it. Okay. Now I'm gonna move forward to mid-2000s, 2005, 6, something like that, to UZA, the University Hospital Antwerp in Belgium. Now, locally in Belgium, this hospital is known for its chickens. It has chickens running around outside of the hospital. You can see them in front of the main entrance. You can see them running around the parking lot. Well, they're not supposed to. Every once in a while, you can see them sneaking in the side entrance. But the reason this hospital is important to our story is it's the place where they first implanted patients with single-sided deafness. So this is a person who has one ear that is performing well acoustically and another that is deaf. Traditionally, we would not implant these patients. Why? Well, we know the sound quality and information provided by a cochlear implant are nowhere near as good as what you would get with a good acoustic hearing ear. So why would you want that noise and that distraction? This seems like a terrible idea. However, there are patients who have one deaf ear and debilitating tinnitus on the side of their deaf ear. So tinnitus that is associated with the bad ear, that is so bad that it's dramatically affecting their lives. What do you do with these people? Well, this group in Belgium noted that many cochlear implant patients have complained about tinnitus, and when they receive their implant, the tinnitus improves. What if they were to put a cochlear implant into the deafened ear? Maybe they didn't need this for hearing because they already had a good ear, but maybe this would help with their tinnitus. And indeed, it did. This is the group that led this project. Paul van de Heining on the left was the surgeon, and Katrien Vermeer on the right was the audiologist. On the top is the very first paper on these patients that demonstrates that these patients, the tinnitus in these patients was greatly reduced. And these made a huge impact on their lives by reducing dramatically the tinnitus. But now you have patients who have a normal acoustic ear and a cochlear implant for the first time. And in the bottom paper, it describes their hearing for the first time. And it turns out, in some situations, it helps them with speech and noise. and it helps them localize sounds, and they like it. Anyway, I really like this slide. Not only was this really cool stuff, but these are people that I'm quite fond of. I was not involved with this work, but I have collaborated closely with both of these people, both Paul and Katrine. I'm particularly fond of Katrine, as many years after the single-sided deafness foundational work, she agreed to marry me. Anyway, as I said, tinnitus is greatly reduced in these patients. There's improvement in speech. People like this. And users sense fullness when listening with the cochlear implant and a normal ear. Okay, so where are we going? Well, I made this slide with great joy that there are soon to be 4 manufacturers in the USA, that Oticon Medical had been FDA approved and was coming. Unfortunately, since making this slide, the Oticon Medical device had a recall, and Cochlear has made an attempt to purchase Oticon Medical. So the future of Oticon Medical, both in general and in the United States, remains unknown. However, I could retool this slide to talk about a 4th manufacturer, Envoy. Envoy does not have a device that's commercial, but they have a research cochlear implant that they are using, and it belongs to this class of devices called a TICI, a totally implanted cochlear implant. So, as I'm sure you all know, the cochlear implant system typically has an internal part and an external part. The external part has a microphone and a battery and transmits the information to the internal part. On the left here, you have the very first TICI, totally implanted cochlear implant that Cochlear made a number of years ago. And it looks like a regular cochlear implant, but additionally, it has a battery that can be recharged through this coil and a microphone that sat under the skin. The device worked, but the microphone under the skin was, shall we say, unsatisfactory. Not only were sounds muffled, but you could hear body sounds like veins and things. It was not a desirable outcome. There are other manufacturers that are working on TICIs. Medel has recently started implanting a few in Europe. And Envoy is a small company in, I believe in Minnesota, that is trying to design one, has designed one, has started to implant a few patients with them. For a microphone, what they use is they attach themselves to the ossicles. These are the bones in the middle ear that vibrate to sound coming in. Now, for most people, when they lose their hearing, they lose it because of damage to the cochlea, but these bones will still vibrate normally. As such, you can use these vibrations, these motions of these bones, potentially as a microphone source, and that's what Envoy is trying to do. Another issue that we're trying to deal with is noise reduction. As I'm sure many of you know, having a conversation one-on-one with the cochlear implant in a quiet environment can often be done. But when you add a little bit of noise, particularly the noise of other people talking in the background, like you might have in a restaurant, for an example, then it becomes really difficult to understand speech. All the manufacturers have included noise reduction in their systems, but their noise reduction algorithms are not good at removing background talkers. And you can imagine why. This is a very difficult task computationally, because what you need to do is you need to separate a talker, the person you're trying to listen to, from a bunch of talkers, the people you're not trying to listen to. You're trying to segregate speech from speech. But in the laboratory, we have built an algorithm, which we call SATA, that is designed specifically to remove background noise of other people talking. And you can see here some early data of cochlear implant users using our algorithm. What you have here is speech understanding in background noise of other people talking. The blue bars are how many words are understood in this background noise of other people talking when using our algorithm. And that's much better than either not having any noise reduction in black or the competition in red of what's actually commercialized, what's in cochlear implants today. This is a very large improvement. Another hot topic is image-guided surgery and fitting. Now, still today, a surgeon will insert a cochlear implant, an electrode array, with little regard to the specifics of the patient's cochlea. Cochleas vary both in shape and size. If you take an image, like a CT scan beforehand, you can plan to figure out which would be the most appropriate electrode array to fit that person's specific geometry. And then after the electrode has been placed, you can verify where the electrode is. And the audiologist can then use that information to program the cochlear implant, to fit the cochlear implant. Again, today, everybody, almost everybody, fits cochlear implants in a one-size-fits-all manner. The audiologist, for the most part, completely ignores where the electrodes lie within the cochlea. If you know exactly where the electrodes lie, you may be able to select the good ones, the ones that seem to be most representative of information, or you may be able to decide which frequencies should be represented by each electrode. Another hot topic is self-fitting. Now, when you go in to see an audiologist, hopefully you've got a good working relationship with your audiologist, but nevertheless, there are going to be many limitations. One is there isn't a lot of time. Everything has to be done efficiently. There isn't a lot of time to play. And then when an audiologist does make an adjustment, I'm sure many of you have experienced this, they'll ask you, how does that sound? Probably no idea how it sounds, because sitting there listening in a booth really does not represent your daily life. So it's very hard to know what the real world effects will be of what the audiologist did until you leave the booth and you go out into the real world. Also, if you want your audiologist to help you and to make things better, you're going to have to communicate with them what your problems are. And that's incredibly difficult because you're going to have to verbalize the specific issues that you have in such a way with enough precision that the audiologist, A, understands your problem and has an idea of what they can do that might actually help you with those problems. And that's a very difficult thing to do. So imagine you had the ability to sit there and play by yourself at home, tweak things around and move a couple sliders and see, oh yeah, that sounds a little better. No, that sounds worse. Oh, that's terrible. Oh, I like that. Yeah. Okay, that's going to make the adjustment that I like. This is a cool hot topic now in research. Remote evaluation is another one. Now, this topic was around before COVID, but of course, COVID has accelerated this. What if you don't need to come in to see your audiologist for every meeting? What if you're going to need to just be evaluated and fit remotely? There's no technical reason why you can't. If you're a patient with no acoustic hearing, there's absolutely no reason that you even need to be in a quiet room because we can send our audio signal directly to your cochlear implant. In which case, why do you need to come in? There are reasons you need to come in, but there are many situations where you may not need to come in. The question is simply the workflow. How do we get the equipment? How do we connect things? How do we make it user-friendly? How do we make it seamless? But this is now a new hot topic, and I think a very, very important one. Hearing preservation is another one. Wouldn't it be great if we could insert an electrode array into anybody and have no damage to whatever hearing they may have? We're working on it. We're working on new surgical techniques, but also on designing electrodes that are softer and more gentle and will cause less damage when being inserted. We're also working on electrodes that emit drugs, like steroids, for an example, that may reduce the damage caused by an insertion. Another hot topic is connectivity. Now, probably a lot of you now hook up your sound processors or your hearing aids directly to your phone. Now, once that's been done, you can do a whole lot of things. You can listen to your movie, or you can talk on the telephone, stream audio. You can also use it to control your device and change parameters. But it could also be done, it also could be used as a fancy computer to control the sound going through the processor. I mean, your phone is a much more powerful computer than that thing you wear behind your ears. There's a lot of power here, and we are just starting to tap in what it is we can do with portable devices like an iPhone or an Android phone. Another future technology being worked on are optogenetic cochlear implants. These are implants that will stimulate the cochlea not with electricity, but with light. The nice part about this is that light is much more precise and will not scatter so much in the conductive perilymph that's inside the cochlea. This should theoretically be able to give us much more precise stimulation of the cochlea, hopefully would give us much better fidelity. There's a lot of cool stuff coming, but I must remind you that the biggest predictor of outcomes with the cochlear implant is the duration of deafness. So waiting for a cochlear implant because you want newer technology is probably a bad idea. In most situations, it's probably better to get implanted with a device today, if you are deaf, than to wait 10 years, have an additional 10 years of deafness, and then get an implant. Anyway, in my lab, we're doing all sorts of research with many topics, including we're working on music and trying to improve it through a cochlear implant. We're developing a noise reduction algorithm to remove background talkers. We're working on self-fitting and adjustment and at-home testing and evaluation. We're doing work on acoustic and electric stimulation. We're developing new surgical and signal processing techniques to more faithfully represent sounds. And we're doing work on pediatric development, what it's like to grow up with the cochlear implant if you're implanted in an early age. With that, I will conclude my talk. Thank you so very much from the team here at NYU.
Thank you, David.
Thank you.
I have many questions. If other people have questions, I would just remind you that the way to get our attention is to go down to the bottom on reactions and raise your hand. So right now I don't see any questions, which is good for me because I get to ask my questions first. So David, I was really interested in the idea of imagery, and I couldn't quite follow. If you take an image of the cochlea before you insert the electrode array, what do you see? I mean, what are you seeing there on the cochlea? And then the second part of my question is, could that kind of imagery be done after the electrode array is inserted to allow you to fine tune it?
Yes and yes. Let me elaborate. So beforehand, there are a couple of things that you could take a look for. The most important one probably is the size of the cochlea. Cochlea, like human hands or feet or noses, come in many different sizes. And so if you have a an electrode array, where that electrode array sits will depend on the size of your cochlea. So there are groups out there, researchers out there, who think larger cochleas should have longer electrodes and shorter cochleas, smaller cochleas should have shorter electrodes. The other thing you can look at with imaging is if there is something unusual about the cochlea. For example, well, you could have a malformed cochlea that's really of a unusual shape. You really need to know this, and people do know this in advance. You do get pre-op imagery. People will know, the surgeons will know this, but that's important. But you can also be used on occasion to predict unusual attributes that you might encounter when inserting an electrode. Afterwards, after you've inserted the electrode, you can also take the image. In an ideal case, you would take imaging before the surgery and after the surgery. After the surgery, if you know exactly where each electrode is, you can determine the position in the cochlea. Now, in an acoustic hearing ear, a given location within the cochlea will respond to a given frequency. You could reprogram the cochlear implant such that the cochlear implant provides the frequencies that would have been represented at that location with an acoustic ear. We don't usually do that. We just make high frequencies higher and low frequencies lower, and we completely ignore what it is that an acoustic ear would hear. But one could customize the frequency representation from each of the electrodes. That would be the most common use for imaging. At NYU, our default is we take a CT scan and get a nice, good image beforehand of the cochlea. And then afterwards, or in the OR, we take an X-ray to make sure that the cochlear implant is not placed, it is not problematically placed, that everything is placed correctly. So in some centers will then take a CT scan afterwards to get a very accurate position of where the implant is that you could potentially use for this sort of fitting. We do not do that by default, because if we don't know what to do with it and it's unnecessary at this point, it isn't deemed clinically necessary, it's extra radiation. And so that trade-off is debated and unknown still at this point.
Can I just follow up with one question, and then I'll get to there are people who have some questions in the chat. But you made the point that is very, very often made, that it is really not a good idea to delay getting a cochlear implant once you've lost your hearing, because they just don't work as well after a long period of time. But what you're saying right now is that this internal component, it does sound like there's going to be much more effective ways on the, the component that's implanted in your head. So is it worth waiting for that?
I mean, none of us know the future. I'm familiar with the research. Who knows how it's going to turn out? If you ask my opinion, if it were me, I would not wait. The reason is the auditory system with deafness, the brain stops listening to the auditory system. Yeah. And so the longer you wait, the less your brain's going to listen to the auditory system. So if we can clean up the signal going into your ears, but your brain stops listening to your ears, it hasn't helped. So I would not wait.
Okay, you stand by your recommendation.
Oh, absolutely, without hesitation.
Okay, Tom Rhodes. You have to unmute yourself.
Hi there, can you hear me?
Hello, I can hear you, Tom.
Hi, thank you. Is music, enjoying music, listening to music severely impacted with the CI, such that you can't enjoy music anymore?
I'm going to take half a step back answering your question. enjoyment is subjective. Some people love listening to music with the cochlear implant. Probably more people do not. Cochlear, however, music, specifically pitch and timbre, is generally not well delivered with the cochlear implant. The majority of people I talk to would say music sounds terrible with the cochlear implants. I would probably feel more comfortable with a cochlear implant here, a user here, describing their experiences. But for the most part, cochlear implant users are very unsatisfied with how music is delivered with the cochlear implant. Pitch is horribly distorted with the cochlear implant. Timbre is not well preserved. Beat and rhythm is well preserved.
Tom Rhodes, if you did not attend our December meeting, you might want to go back and watch the video that's on our website, because we had 4 musicians with hearing loss talking about their experiences. Georgia?
Yes, I wondered, is there an age cap, a suggested age cap? I asked because I'm homing in on 82. So.
Oh, no. No, for a cochlear implant, you're still young. Not to worry. We've implanted patients in their hundreds. Really, the issue, the concern is, are you healthy enough for the anesthesia? And that's really the only concern about getting a cochlear implant. At NYU, we are now giving cochlear implants with the local anesthesia, and you stay awake in the process as an option. And this makes the risk of anesthesia much, much, much less. And older adults are often opting for that now at NYU.
Well, my older sister, she's older by 3 years. She was told she was too old. So,
well, clearly she was not at NYU. But no, I don't think it. So
I'll pass this along to her.
There are other there are other factors that are looked at that may or may not disqualify her, but the age alone is not going to disqualify. I see here, Ruth is just typing in the chat that she had hers at 89, for an example.
I wrote a few years ago about, I interviewed a bunch of cochlear implant surgeons around the country about the oldest patients they'd implanted, and they all said what David's saying, that, you know, it depends mostly on whether you can tolerate the anesthesia. So I would say she should definitely look further. She sounds pretty young for a cochlear implant to me.
Absolutely, yeah.
Cookie, hi.
Hi, okay, great.
Hello.
I tuned in late. Hi, David. I tuned in late, so I'm not sure if you addressed this, but as I get older, more and more doctors seem to want to do, like, ask me about MRIs. And I'm just wondering, is that addressed, you know, the cochlear implant? You can't have an MRI?
So this is a very good question. And no, I did not mention MRI at all. Do you have an implant at the moment?
Yes, I do.
Okay. So so the implant, because of the magnet, MRIs can be complicated. For most devices, you can get an MRI with a very weak, low-powered MRI. The strength of that MRI will depend on the particular device you have, the particular model you have. If you end up in a serious situation where you need an MRI, and this is going to be a problem, there are, for most devices, there are very simple surgeries that will remove the magnet temporarily. And by simple, I really mean simple. They just cut open the skin. They don't have to dig in at all. and pull it out in the worst case scenario. If you're seriously interested and concerned, send me your device information. If you know which model you have, which implant model you have, I can tell you what the MRI limitations are on it. Some I know off the top of my head, and some I'd have to look up, but I can do that for you if you'd like.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Christopher Baker.
Yes, I appreciate it. Yeah, I've asked a couple questions in the chat, but apparently right now I'm in a discussion with another person on here about the fact that if you're having sensorineural hearing loss, in my case, Meniere's syndrome,
I'm sorry.
and the Meniere's, yes.
Oh, no, I was expressing my sympathy for the.
Okay. And that's an indication that the sensors inside your cochlear are not working as they should. They're deteriorating. If you put a CI in, how does that improve that? And doesn't the condition that caused the sensorineural hearing loss continue to decay, and thus your CI becomes less and less useful?
So what happens is, no. And in fact, Meniere's patients tend to be very good candidates for cochlear implants. In sensorineural hearing loss, I wish I cut all this from my talk for length. I'm sorry about that. In sensorineural hearing loss, the hair cells in the cochlea die. Now, those are the cells that take the physical vibrations in the cochlea and translate them into electrical impulses, and they die off. So what a cochlear implant does is it electrically stimulates the same neurons that the hair cells would have stimulated. So it bypasses, it replaces the hair cells functionally. So no, with your sensorineural hearing loss, a cochlear implant would be very functional. And as your hearing continues to deteriorate, the cochlear implant will not become less effective as a result.
Yeah, but the cochlear implant is not going all the way to the auditory nerve. It's just going into the cochlear. So if the cochlear itself isn't working as well, one would think the CI it wouldn't be able to work as well either.
No. So okay. Do I have? I need thinking. Do I have a picture available to show you? When the hair cells die off, right? They stimulate. So the hair cells in the cochlea die off, but the auditory nerve feeds into the cochlea. So as we look, I need a picture to explain this well. Forgive me, I'm looking to see if I can find a picture real well because my words are not very clear. Amazing, all these slides I have, I don't have a good picture. So what happens is, so the hair cells die off, but they are not the only cells inside the cochlea. They're the first stage in electric hearing with an acoustic input. So the cells that they stimulate, the ganglion cells behind them, are those tend to still be good, and the cochlear implant electrically stimulates them, and those are sitting there in the cochlea. This is not a problem at all. Yeah, I'm trying. If you want to send me an email, I will draw this up for you. I'm struggling here live trying to find a good image to explain this to you, but I'd be happy to, if you want to send me an email.
All right, I'll do that. No problem. Thank you.
I apologize for the poor on the spot explanation.
There's a bunch of questions in the chat and the type is really small. And I'm going to call on two people who have their hands raised. Judy first and then Leanne. And then I'm going to try to ask some of these questions in the chat. But if you asked a question in the chat and you're happy asking it orally, please raise your hand and I'll call on you after we have these next two questions. So Judy, you go first.
Well, I was reading the new Medicare guidelines for eligibility, and one of the comments was about middle ear infections. Does that impact your, what's that about, and how does that impact your eligibility? Because I have chronic ear infections, mild. Does that mean I'm not eligible?
I don't think so. I'm not entirely I'm going to have to apologize. I'm not a clinician, so I don't know specifically. But you cannot have an infection during the surgery, but I don't see why having a chronic ear infection would be problematic. Honestly, I don't know the answer to this. It would be worth talking to a clinician. This I don't know.
I do have an appointment, so.
Yeah, I apologize.
No problem. Thank you.
Leanne?
Okay, hi, thank you so much for your informative presentation. What I was wondering is, and I put this in the chat, I have moderately profound hearing loss.
Yes.
I do relatively well with hearing aids. So yes. I don't know if I'd even qualify. And I was wondering, do you lose the hearing, that ability you have presently, and the CI takes over? Because I was wondering, what if the CI didn't work, then I would have no hearing.
That is a wonderful question. The short answer is, it's not that I don't know, it's that nobody knows. The issue, so the answer is maybe. Sometimes hearing is preserved beautifully. Sometimes hearing is lost completely. And sometimes the answer is in between. And we still have great difficulty predicting who you will be, which of those people you will be. If you, I don't know if you qualify, but if you received an implant hypothetically, it's possible that you would lose all acoustic hearing in that ear. If so, you would have the benefit of a cochlear implant, but of course at the expense of whatever it is you had in that ear. By default, because of these sorts of risks, we tend to implant the worse ear. So I don't know how symmetrical your hearing is, but if we implant the worse ear and you were to lose the hearing in that ear, you'd have all the benefits of a cochlear implant on that side, and we would not have affected your hearing on the other side. Now, I don't know that that's necessarily would be reassuring enough to get a cochlear implant. It's a tough decision. It's tough to know, but that's the trade-off that has to be weighed.
You know, you said about the connection with your brain and not hearing, and that's why you shouldn't wait so long. Well, my hearing aids that work really well are out for repair, and I have old ones in. Yeah. And I already noticed in a matter of a couple of days, I'm tuning people out. And I'm not doing it intentionally. I don't understand what they're saying. So I'm just like removed. So what you're saying is very, very true.
Yeah, imagine not inferior hearing aids, but imagine nothing for years.
Right.
That would be bad.
Thank you.
Oh, sure. My pleasure.
Hi, this is Dana. I'm visually impaired, and for some reason I can't raise my hand.
Oh, Dana Simon.
Yes.
Yeah, you did raise your hand. Your hand is raised. Go ahead. Before you start to talk, David, while Dana's asking her question, if you can do two things at once.
Sure.
Put your email address in the chat. A number of people would like to ask you questions. Okay, Dana, go ahead.
Hi, yes. I'm a longtime member. I was on the board years ago. And I got my first Cochlear N24 by Cochlear in 2003, and my second in 2006. And I wish I had been able to get it years ago. I was a librarian at New York Public Library. I could hear on the phone, but I had to have people spell out their names when they said their name. You know, portable microphones in the noisy situation didn't work for me. If I had been able to get my Cochlear, no, I had known about it in 1980 when I was in my 20s. And they told me that ones in the 1980, you can only hear like dogs barking. That's what I was told. But in 2003, many members of HLAA were getting cochlear implants, and they all started smiling. I could, you know, all these people were smiling, and they were hearing better than me with my hearing aid. And I went and got it. It was a miracle. I can hear my cat toenails clicking on the floor. I can hear people talking from the other room. I can eavesdrop on people. When I went to the library, we worked in a small room, and my boss would be making his travel reservations, and I could hear every word he said. I could hear where he was booking his, and they all thought I couldn't hear him. So, you know, I would never wait for a cochlear implant. If you need one now, I could have had so much better jobs. If I had gotten my cochlear implant 10 years ago, I could have moved up the ladder. I could have increased my salary. I could have done so much better all those years. But I got my cochlear implant in my 40s instead of in my 30s or 20s. And I'm sorry about that. And now I have the latest Nucleus 8 from Cochlear, which is, I took out my Nucleus 24, gigantic compared to it. And they have an app on the iPhone, which you can now use as a remote control. And I'm visually impaired, so I use VoiceOver on my remote. And some of the functions don't work with VoiceOver. It thinks I'm on the phone. And I think they need to improve these apps to work with VoiceOver. And it would be great if you could really adjust everything on your own without having to go in and fine tune everything. And also the other thing that would be good is swimming. They have a new thing that you can put on to go in the water. As I have a vision impairment, I can't see when I'm in a pool. So to be able to hear in the water would be amazing.
This is, I didn't know about the VoiceOver issue. That's an interesting problem.
Yes.
But for the most part, that's a wonderful story. I'd like to add to it slightly. The Nucleus 24 that you have, that's almost 20 years old.
That's right. And it still works with the latest cochlear implant, Nucleus 8, still works.
Yep.
I've had it for 20 years, 20 years to this year, 20 years.
I can tell you many, many wonderful upgrades in the newer internals since you've gotten them. But at the same point, if you ask me how many of these upgrades really matter, I don't know. The Nucleus 24, if you were to implant it today, would still be a wonderful device.
I hear better than my husband, and he had normal hearing. I'm in a noisy situation. I hear all these things that other people don't hear. They all think I have bionic hearing.
Well, you do.
Thank you. We're going to move.
And I had my cochlear implant 20 years ago. Why would I wait when I could improve my life right then? You know, it was a miracle.
We have a lot of questions waiting, so I'm gonna cut you off there, Dana. Leanna, your hand is still up. I think you don't have a new question. So it's Adelaide.
My question has to do with if you have one cochlear implant like I do, and I'm really thrilled. Obviously, how do you make the decision whether to have a second one? And
Right.
just say example that you are healthy enough to have the anesthesia,
Yep.
but I hear from people having a second one and it doesn't work as well, or does it require as much training? I mean, I've really worked hard on the training on this one. So I'd just like to hear what you'd have to say about that.
That's a good question. The short answer is it's hard to know. Some more specifics on that is how you do with your implant. The first one is a decent predictor of how you will do with the second one, but there's no guarantee that the second one will be better or worse. It could go either way. I would ask you to consider things like, which is your better ear? How much benefit do you get out of your hearing aid at the moment? Okay, now I don't know how to quantify that, but that sounds like a good indication that you're not that an implant might be useful if you're doing well with the first implant, and you've no reason to believe that the second implant would be bad, that there's no red flag. You also have no guarantees it's good, but there's no red flag. That your best bet is it will be relatively similar. How long ago did you get your first implant?
4 years.
Okay, that's not that long ago.
Right.
And before that, was your hearing similar in the 2 years?
Right, but I did do the worst ear. When I sit and play in the piano, that's
Yeah.
the only reason I'm not doing it. If I put the hearing aid in, there's something about the music that is beautiful. So that stops me more than anything.
Honestly, this is up for you to decide. The music is a real risk. You'd have to talk to your ENT, but it sounds like from a speech daily existence, you likely would get a lot of benefit of getting the second implant.
Yeah, I would.
In terms of the music, it may not be a good thing, and there's a lot of risk and a lot of unknown, and that's going to have to be a personal decision.
Thank you.
Sure.
Gail?
Yeah, hi, I'm Gail, and I'm in California, even though I still have my New York accent.
Representing.
So my question has to do exactly with why some people can hear music and some people can't. I mean, I would consider myself a super candidate. I have 2 cochlear implants. I heard music from day one. I have 2 advanced bionic cochlear implants, and I love them. And as far as hearing music, I've got a program that when I go to the symphony, all I can feel like is everything is huge and round, and I can hear each instrument where they are. So it's pretty great. But I have a friend who didn't hear any music for the first 10 years she had a cochlear implant. All she heard was buzz. So my understanding is that they can only put so many replace so many of your hundreds and hundreds of hearing nerves, and that some people don't hear music.
This is all right. In terms of hearing music, somebody asked me about this before, and I paused. Most people don't like what they hear. Some people love it. Some people have great stories like you. We don't know how to predict it. I don't know what to tell you.
This is Dana. Can you hear me?
Yes,
Yeah.
Dana. Hi, Dana.
I can hear music. I can follow the words of songs and things. I wouldn't make myself a musician like a pianist, or I mean, I could play a piano song, but I wouldn't consider myself to be a great musician. But my appreciation of music greatly improved with a cochlear implant than before. But if someone's a musician, I would definitely keep one ear with the hearing aid and one with the cochlear implant.
That sounds
Yeah.
reasonable.
I can hear music much better with my cochlear implant than I ever could with my hearing aid.
Just, you hear the stories both ways.
Okay, I'm sorry. Dana, I muted you because we have so many people who want to ask questions still. And so the people who haven't asked questions yet, I'm going to call on you first. And if you can keep them short, we might get all of them asked. So Ruth, you're muted.
I was 86 years old when I had my implant. So to the person who's worried about age, I would say, if you are in good physical condition and your MD clears you for surgery, go for it. Many people say that having a CI is close to having a facelift because that stress that you're always got on your face disappears. And there's one other factor that I think people really don't talk about, which I noticed right away, which is that my physical fatigue level went down enormously because my brain wasn't struggling to hear all the time. And let me tell you, as a now 89-year-old person, I appreciate that enormously. Don't wait. The new stuff looks terrific. Take advantage of what you have now.
Thank you, Ruth. Marjorie? Marjorie Haber? Okay, Marjorie doesn't seem to be there. I'm going to skip over to.
I'm here. I just was finding my unmute button.
Hi, Marjorie.
I have a genetic progressive sensory neural hearing loss, which was adult onset. And so my hearing's gotten worse since I was like 25 or so. Now I'm at the point where it's gotten so bad I need a cochlear implant.
Yeah.
But there's a complication because I have an acoustic neuroma in the right ear that needs a cochlear implant. So I'm wondering, how does that work? Do I need to have the acoustic neuroma removed first before getting the cochlear implant?
I'm going to apologize and defer this question. This is something should be asked of a clinician. I don't know the answer.
Oh, thank you.
I think that's correct. We actually have some people in the chapter who have acoustic neuromas, and it is really something to ask a clinician, ENT, David's researcher. I think we only have time for one more question, and so I'm going to call on Robin Miller, and that'll be our last question, unfortunately. But David has put his email address into the chat, I believe, and you can write him there. And if you can't find him there, you can write to info@hearinglossnyc.org, and I will forward your email to David.
My email is also the email address. When you register for this conference, you get a confirmation for my email address. So you all have my email address in your inboxes.
So we have time for one last question, quick question, Robin Miller.
Hi, so I just wanted to follow up on your question actually, which was about if they took a scan after the surgery to see the placement was good for the electrode. I don't understand what the audiologist can do with it. Is it because different tones are at different parts of the cochlea, or how can they know with this? picture. Yeah.
So there are two popular approaches, two popular answers for this. One is what you're describing, is that if you take a look, you have 12 to 22 electrodes in the cochlea, and you can look for your brand. Electrode 4 represents frequencies between 500 and 700 hertz, for an example, by default.
I see. Okay.
Then by default, everyone who has that brand will have that frequency range put onto electrode 4. However, if we look at your cochlea through imaging, we can see that in your ear, where electrode 4 is, that should be 900 to 1100 hertz. So, okay, instead of representing 6 to 7, we're going to represent 9 to 11 there. And we're going to reassign the frequencies that are going to each electrode. That's one possibility. There's another possibility, a totally different approach. It's being pioneered at Vanderbilt, where instead of looking at what frequencies are represented by each electrode, they can look to see what neural populations will be stimulated by given electrodes. It may be that electrode 4 and electrode 5, the electric fields are overlapping and they're stimulating similar parts of the ear, of the cochlea. In which case, you're probably not getting benefit from two different pieces of information there. They may actually be competing and making things worse. And
then they can turn one off.
Exactly. So if you know your geometry, you might be able to do that. I mean, one way of knowing this is if you sit in front of a piano, for an example, and you play all the notes, you go up and down, you can look to see, okay, getting higher, getting higher, getting higher. Wait, no, these all sound the same. Then you say, okay, at that frequency range, there's a problem between these notes. And maybe you know what notes they are. Maybe you don't, and you just take a picture of which buttons they are, and you can bring that to somebody who knows what frequencies they are. And then you can tell your audiologist, I got a problem here at this point there. They go, oh, that's electrodes 17, 18, and 19. They must be crowding each other. Okay, let's do something about it. But they would never know that in a clinical fitting system.
That's interesting. So I just wanted to say very quickly, I had hearing loss for 37 years and a deafness in one ear, and just got implanted a few months ago. And I'm listening to this on my CI side only, so streaming it. So it's worked really well, even though it's 37 years.
That's great. Congratulations.
Our time is up, David.
Okay.
Thank you so much. This is fascinating, and people have such interesting questions, and there are more in the chat. I do encourage you to follow up in writing if your question wasn't answered. There are some hands still raised, but I feel like we have to stop because we're over time now. So thank you so much, David, Dr. David Landsberger, and thank you to everybody who attended. Okay, bye.